I'm going to be able to share my screen with you, but I just kind of wanted to start with a baseline of where you are, both personally and in your business, of really knowing what's going on with kind of the restarting Maine's economy plan, what that means for some of the businesses. I think as office environments, there's maybe the least amount of clarity for us around what timeline we're operating on and what precautions. We don't have a checklist specifically for office environments. They certainly haven't created one just for chambers. So we have to sort of pull our pieces together and do the best we can to prepare for what is coming. What I will note is so far, the advance notice for any industry on any impact to them has been very small. In fact, sometimes there is absolutely no advance notice. And so I think one of the things we're paying attention to here at the Chamber is pulling the best information we can from other states' plans, what we can infer from what's known from our own state about different stages of opening and requirements for each of us, and make that available to you as far in advance so that you can do what feels right for you and your business in terms of preparing for what it might look like for you to reopen. So that's going to be what I share with you today. I'm pulling some of the links forward from the email that I shared with you last night, and I'll cover some of what those are and why I shared some with you. You might have wondered why I shared with you the salon checklist link. If you have not had a chance to look at that yet, that is the most detailed checklist that the state has made available yet. It includes a series of questions that you're required to ask people before you have an in-person appointment. It is likely that if a function of your office work is inviting clients in for a dialogue at some point, for the credit union, that might be a loan appointment for a loan client. You could probably infer that the requirement to ask those questions at the time that you register the appointment, and again, when they show up for the appointment, is probably going to be an expectation for you. And so thinking about what it looks like to prepare your staff for that. I think maybe putting those questions on laminated cards that are easily disinfected and wiped, but are a standard reminder for anyone in your office that might be interacting directly with somebody or making appointments, would probably be helpful ways to prepare for that which we don't know yet. So I'll share my screen in a minute and get underway with that. But before we begin, what questions might you hope I get to, or what might you hope I cover so that I can tailor this to your specific needs as best as possible? You're welcome to chat it into the box or unmute yourself and let me know by voicing your questions out loud.
This is Lisa La Liberty. Can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Lisa. Welcome.
Hi. So I'm just curious if there are resources available, like pre-printed. I read on the guidelines that we need to have posters at our point of entry and in the office. And so I didn't know if these are things that are maybe accessible and pre-printed, or if we just have to type something up ourselves. That would be one question. I had a lot of questions about bringing my employees back, but I'll wait and see what you talk about first.
Yeah, and anything that you feel like I didn't answer in that regard, do raise it again when we come full circle, Lisa. It's absolutely part of what I'm going to be speaking to, but yes. In terms of printed resources, that's a really great question. There's the badging resource, and I am going to cover that for you. You're not required. I think this is maybe the most important thing that there's been some confusion on. You are not required to post a badge that you've completed the checklist or that you're verified to be reopened. They've created that because they saw a demand when businesses were being deemed essential or non-essential. Folks were putting long form letters in their windows. And so DECD thought they were being helpful by making something that was a printable resource that you could use to identify that you are in compliance. And you're welcome to, but it's not a requirement. Other than that, there are some hand washing material printed. I have not seen any consistent social distancing guidelines or this is what 6 feet looks like guidelines. There's a whole bunch out there. I'm happy to put together a resource kit, and we could probably get you some that you could easily add your own logo to if you have someone in your staff that's doing some basic graphics, or a chamber one. But we can make that resource available to you this week because I think that's a really great point. So I will check that out, Lisa, and see what I can find that's specific. And I've got links for you both from the state and from OSHA. And there is no printable resources on those sites or in the documents I shared with you. It was something I was looking for. So not helpful in the moment, but I will follow up and provide you something useful this week. How's that sound? Okay. Great question. Keisha asked, stage 3 mentioned by the governor didn't say anything about continuing to work from home. Do you know if that will be expected? That's a really great question. And I think this gets to the heart of the matter for each of us. And so I'm gonna share my screen and pull up those stagings so that you can see that and really know what we're looking at so far. Let me just toggle this out of the way. So this is the staging that Keisha's speaking to. And if you, these guiding principles, I think, are the thing that you can go back to as trying to fill in the blanks on the questions that you have that don't feel answered. I am not going to pretend that it's comprehensive or even entirely helpful. So I'm going to scroll down for a second. What I think you're talking about is at-risk people should stay home when possible in stage 1. That's where we currently are. Stage 2, which theoretically starts in June, again says that at-risk people should stay home when possible. And so this is us really looking at our employees and saying, you know, because of your age group, because you've self-identified that you or someone you live with is immunocompromised or has health risks, and that information about what those health risks are is in the OSHA document that I shared with you. So if you would like to put a list together of what those concerns are for your employees, to simply say, yes, I fall into this category, I don't need to tell you why, but I'm in this category, I'm self-identifying and should remain working at home for longer. That's probably the most safe approach to that. So in stage 3, the language here is at-risk people should stay home when possible. Employees in legal and professional fields may return to offices, including state employees as needed. What you really have here is an indication that you are going to be able to do what suits you best. And what our state has taken, and this is true from the whole administration, so this is showing up in DECD and in DOL, their policies, and the practice behind those policies through all of these kind of pandemic related emergent topics, is it always goes back to public safety, number 1, and preference for the safety of the employer. And so those are kind of the ways in which they have biased their responses. And I say that without a value judgment, but that's the lens that they're viewing it through. And so ultimately, you as an employer are not required to bring your employees back on site at any point. If you're able to work out an agreement with your employee and you're comfortable with them continuing to work remotely because they're at risk or self-identify as at risk, then you are in good stead, and these stages will not apply to you at any point. So you as an employer always will have that right to determine the best working environment for you and your employees. What essentially is being said is you can't bring them forward if they're at risk. You cannot require them to come back to work. And that's because of the Families First Response Act, which was the second legislation that was passed, that it expanded some benefits, some class of folks that weren't included in unemployment before, and looked at some Family Medical Leave Act expansion areas. So you're welcome, Keisha. Happy to answer that question. Other questions that you're hoping that we can get to? If not, I'll kind of like give you the grand overview and maybe pull out some of the things that I think are maybe the most important for you to be paying attention to, or where there has been a lot of dialogue in other groups. Does that sound good? Okay. If you have a specific question, don't hesitate to put it in the chat box. So you'll note employees in legal and professional fields can return to offices in July. In June, you may, but it is not required in either category. Any businesses that have been open will be able to remain open in June, but we're still making some special considerations for folks who are at risk. So we're looking at this as really the opportunity for folks to be coming back to offices. What I would tell you, and I think this is a really important thing that we're seeing, particularly, I mean, you guys joined the office conversation, the office environment conversation. There is going to be lasting impacts to our workforce and how we work, where we work, how we manage our teams forever. There are portions of what companies have done to adapt in this pandemic that won't be undone. Some businesses that have been reticent to explore remote environments or some of the tech, or were concerned employees wouldn't have the desire or the time or the wherewithal to pick up some of these new tools. Everyone's found out pretty quickly what they're capable of, and a lot of folks have adapted fast. And there is already large conversations in the human resources environment and globally about how a large portion of our workforce might remain remote for a very long time. And within that is not just the preference, but is the reality that until a vaccine or a cure is widely available, your at-risk folks are going to be working remotely until that time comes. And it could be 18 to 24 months or longer, unfortunately. Realistically, you might choose to have your employees work at home because they're more efficient, because it has been more flexible and it supports your work environment longer. So there's no requirement in the reopening our economy plans at the state or federal level that part of what you have to do is fill your office back up. In fact, I think the two things that are most important that you're seeing in some of these checklists and some of the guidance when you click through to the higher details is a desire for employers to find ways to stagger shifts so there are less bodies on site at one time. And so you might look at 7 o'clock start times and then a 9:30 start time and then a 12 o'clock start time, and you'll have coverage at the office from 7 in the morning until 8 at night. That kind of staggering of your shifts, whether you were a first and second or first, second, and third shift environment before, you might be staggering and asked to stagger, or you might choose to stagger proactively. Additionally, your at-risk employees, you can expect will continue to work from home and will be supported in choosing to work from home or having exemptions to be able to work from home. That is likely to stay in effect for a very long time. So those are two things that you should probably be considering right out of the gate. I mean, I looked at most of your businesses, and most of your businesses kind of do fall into this kind of at-large professional services environment. The thing that I would find of value and encourage you to look at is if you are doing any direct client or business to business work, you want to have a sense of when other businesses are opening. Two reasons for that. One is it might impact the services they need from you or the way in which they're going to be able to get their services from you. I think the other really important note is if you are paying attention to what is being requested of some of these industries as they open, your ability to get the personal protective equipment or PPE that you need for your staff because office environments are the last to rejoin the workforce in a physical way, we're also the last to enter the supply and distribution chain. And so some of the businesses right now that need a high level of PPE that have never had to factor that in before are trying to find access points for increased amounts of disinfectant, for hand sanitizer, for face masks, in some places, face shields and goggles. That was what your hairstylist needs to be able to do your hair now. So you're now competing in a marketplace for items that you've never had in your purchase. Many of you probably have never had in your purchase orders or in your cost structure. And those are things that you're going to need to be considering. Even with, I know that we have an attorney on our call. Even attorneys who are meeting face-to-face with clients might choose to continue to use remote technology so that you don't have to invest in the PPE or if the PPE is not available. And so just kind of naming that on the outset as why paying attention to these stages, even if you're not really guided by a specific stage opening, why that matters. I'm going to show you the checklist page. If you haven't found your way here yet, it's expected that new stages will be added Right now, these checklists are up for stage 1. I would, and I did share the link with you for the salons, but I would take the time to click on that and see. And I think I have it up for you. This is the general guidance, which is useful as well. I'll come back to that because that's what everyone needs to follow. But I'll share this with you. And to Lisa's point, these questions here, Lisa, these questions right here in the middle of your screen are I can make this larger, sorry guys. These questions right here are the questions that you're supposed to be asking before and then at the time of an appointment in any kind of in-person environment. Now, this is true for stylists, and maybe these questions are somehow reduced, or the expectation that you use them are somehow reduced. Everything that I've seen so far indicates that you're probably going to be asking these questions if you have in-person meetings. You should also get familiar with, these are questions that your employees should be self-identifying if they are experiencing any of these. So you might be thinking, as you have folks come back to the office, to be saying pretty clearly, if any of these begin to be something for you, you need to stay home, and you need to let us know that that's the case. If you have employees who are planning vacation time and they're planning to be out of state, they're going to come with a 14-day quarantine when they return. And so asking for vacation time to be out of the office now is a much longer commitment than the 3 or 4 days that they were taking to go see a game in Boston. Not that there's a lot of games being held, but it really does change the way in which you're thinking about your human resources and managing your team. This would be the set that I would put on a laminated card that can be wiped clean with a disinfecting cloth, and make available to anyone who's actually scheduling any appointments with people in person. It would be really easy to forget these questions or to forget 1 or 2 of these questions. And this is the guidance that's being given currently. The other kind of big takeaways from this sheet, here's the list of PPE and what the expectations are. I don't imagine that capes and smocks will be required for everybody. I think that's hopefully salon specific. And I really hope that's true for face shields too. They're very hard to acquire and they're not inexpensive. But this is just a sample of what folks are being required to do to be in person with kind of close proximity. The other kind of big takeaways from this, and I won't go through the whole document, is if you're an office environment, welcome Rachel, if you're an office environment that has a waiting room, you should stop using it. You should plan on stop using it. If you're somebody who serves the public in a walk-in basis and they find themselves in the waiting room and then you take them for a payment or for question answering, you're going to want to send some communication out in advance that lets folks know that you're trying to limit the amount of that activity in general. What we've seen is if you have 4 chairs in your waiting room and they're right next to each other, you're probably going to have to block off 3 of them to maintain a 6-foot social distance. And so think about removing furniture, think about covering furniture. If there are magazines in your waiting room, you're going to want to remove those. Anything that becomes a touch point, you want to remove. Marking 6-foot distances for any line management. If there's ever a point when you have more than 1 person in your office who's waiting to be seen or to be connected with, you're going to need to manage the line and ensure some social distance there. The other part that is hard, and I encourage you, it's one thing to say we need to do this, and it's another thing to support your team in knowing how to do that with confidence. And I would name that specifically, that's true around face masks. So if folks are coming into a building, particularly a closed environment, and in the summer months, more particularly with air conditioning where air is being recirculated, you need to have folks wearing face masks. That includes your employees if they're interacting with the public. It is not true that everyone needs to wear a face mask if you're in an office environment where you can maintain a social distance. So if your office staff is a staff of 6 and they each have their own office, or their cubicles are 6 feet apart from each other, or they, when seated in their cubicles, are 6 feet apart from each other, they don't need to wear masks. They're full day at work. But if they're regularly engaging with the public, then they do. You also need to be ensuring that folks coming in from the public are wearing masks. And if you're on social media right now, you know that is a controversial topic. So what does it look like to support your staff with the language and the signage that says, you know, due to CDC guidelines, you're required to wear a mask? That's a very different approach than saying, make sure anyone you talk to is wearing a mask. Because it's an uncomfortable and new thing to be asking people to do. And it's an uncomfortable and new thing to be asked to do. And so everyone's kind of navigating that a little differently. So I would be considering how you're preparing your staff for questions they might get, and what course of action you want them to take. For example, if someone says, I have a medical condition and I don't wear a mask, how are you supporting your staff and saying, okay, or no, or right? Like you need to be thinking about your policies and how you have procedures that support your team. Another document that I can share, the general guidance. This is where you can get some of the language around who higher risk employees might be. And as somebody who, I'm a little bit obese, I'm overweight, I acknowledge that. I would be on this list, right? And this list, when you look at what is on this list, comprises a large part of our population, particularly in Maine, when you look at health and public health statistics around our demographics. And so, you know, if folks choose to come in, if they fall into this category, miss being connected, want to be into the office and can do so safely and at a social distance, then that's fantastic. There's no requirement for you to keep them home. But with that is a little bit of liability. That's a great question. I'll get to that one. This is the list though. It's not as simple as COPD, over 65, or has cancer, which I think was some of the ways in which people were thinking about this back in February. So this is the list that you would be circulating, and it's coming directly from the governor's office. This gives you the guidance on maintaining 6 feet, limiting your physical face-to-face staff meetings, ensuring that the physical distancing is there, using electronic communications, staggering meal time. So if you're an office environment that always takes a lunch break together at noon, you're going to want to change that habit. That practice needs to shift based on these general guidelines. Things that you would expect, making sure hand washing is available, that there's soap and towels available, that hand sanitizer is around. Those are things that make sense and we've always done and are harder to do now than ever because of the availability of some of those products. Whomever you work with to supply your office with those items, you're going to want to be checking now for your June reopening about what it looks like to make sure that you have a supply of those needs. If you're a small office and you've usually stocked yourself up at BJ's or at Staples, you might still be able to do that, but I would consider talking to a local distributor or office supplier to ensure that you have a backup, because that's going to be something that's going to consistently be on your shopping list for months to come. I think one of the things that we don't have enough science about and that you're going to want to be paying attention to is ventilated workspaces. You know, most office environments are used to having all the windows closed and having the air conditioning on throughout the summer months. And, you know, most of the filters that we have in our air conditioning systems don't catch this one. And so you can talk to your HVAC company about different filters. There's not a ton of science. There's a little bit though on the size of the virus and what size filter needs to catch it. But you might choose to open your windows this summer, which would be a different work environment for sure. At least through the next, I mean, really, they've got the quarantining in place through all of the stages that are timed out. So through the foreseeable future, if your business is one where your employees have to do or can occasionally have out-of-state travel, you're going to want to really be considering what that looks like. Because if you send them on an out-of-state trip, they can't come back to your office for 14 days after they return. So be thinking about the impacts on that and what that looks like. Some offices might have more than one location, and they're really asking that you're limiting your staff travel between multiple locations. So if you normally have, Susie work in Lisbon on Monday and Norway on Wednesday and work from home on Tuesday and then be back in the Lisbon Street office on Friday, you might really change that practice as well, based on this guidance. As you can imagine, and it's more important than ever, if anyone on your staff shows up and we have a culture of being hard workers and wanting to show up, and how many of us have toughed it through a low grade fever, or not feeling our best, or just hoping that cough goes away. That's probably a thing of the past. And that's not something that we can model to our employees or ask of our employees. In fact, more than ever, if we see any symptoms like that, we have to send them home. And we would hope that it wouldn't get to that point, because they will have been educated and supported to know that they should just call us and work remotely that day, if they're not able to be symptom free. That's going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be a shift in how we communicate that to our employees. One of the questions that I got is how we deal with folks who are potentially visibly sick and are coming into their office. And I think that could both be an employee or a client or customer. You're going to want to have a really honest conversation about what your policy is. If you have an attorney, if you have an attorney on retainer, this is a question that you might ask them as well, in terms of where you can stand in restricting access to your property. And then make sure that your staff knows that, is implementing it consistently. The biggest thing that can put you at risk is if your employee on Tuesday let someone cough in their face and didn't send them away, and on Thursday a different employee tries to hold their ground. That's going to send mixed messages and make it much harder for you and for your employees to navigate what is, quite frankly, a really uncomfortable and tense situation, because people hear a request for you or your other staff to be safe, and some folks are definitely responding from a very defensive place. Not everybody, but it's something you should be aware of and you might not have had to consider before. The cleaning and disinfecting requirements are pretty straightforward and clear. If you regularly have people come in and out of your business and location, cleaning between people coming in is going to be time consuming. We just saw a job posting for temperature takers the other day. And so, I mean, there's going to be new positions that come out of what we're dealing with, where, somebody's literally standing at a door and their job is to make sure that everyone's temperature is being taken. These are the things that you're going to want to be considering. We've talked to some businesses about taking a good look at what your office environment looks like and having surfaces that are easier to disinfect, and thinking about ways to get rid of some of your cloth surfaces. So this might be the perfect time to upgrade to wood blinds or plastic blinds and get rid of the drapes. Things that you hadn't thought about before are things that you should now. So one of the questions that we got is around contact tracing. And so I sent in the email that I sent to you, there's an article on testing and tracing needs. And if you haven't had a chance to read that, I would encourage you to. I think when we think about what business owners might be advocating for from our administration and what they could be doing to support businesses, the two that come to mind really quickly are supporting a robust supply chain of the needed PPE for you to open your business safely and to follow the guidelines that are put out. That is something that I think all of you are going to need help with. We're looking at the chamber to play a role in supporting that through some bulk buying for some of our smaller members who might not have access to larger distribution or price points that come with larger purchasing. The other thing is specifically around testing. And so, the question specifically, what kind of responsibility do you as business owners have for contact tracing? If you have a business where you can keep a record of who's come through your door, so if you're a bank, it might be pretty easy to see who has withdrawn or deposited money on any given day. If you have a sign-in sheet that allows you to know who has come in your door, that's going to be a different type of tracing. The real tracing that they're going to focus on is if one of your employees is ill, they're going to be able to come to you and say, who else worked with this person, you know, in a closed environment in the, you know, 10 days leading up to it and the 3 days since, you know, they were sick before they showed symptoms and went home. And you should be able to say, here's who we had in our office. Here are the employees that we had in that location. So I think that's a responsibility you will be expected to have. I don't think you will be expected or liable to know who has come in off the street, but if you had an appointment and it was known in advance that you had an appointment with somebody, you might be expected to be able to say who from the public your staff had met with in a planned way. So kind of record keeping in those accounts may be something to pay attention to. There's a question about liability with taking temperatures. Can an employer require that, and how much can employers require without some folks claiming we're infringing on personal liberties? Oh, Betsy, that's a hot topic. I don't have a good answer for you, and I'm sensitive to the fact that we do have an attorney who dabbles in HR and business work on this call. What I would say is the world of liability as it relates to the pandemic in general and COVID specifically is being litigated, and it's just starting to be litigated, and that is what is going to form the answer for that. Yes, I will send that to you, Keisha. No one wants to see the inside of my inbox. And Mike, I'll encourage you to pipe in, but what I will say is we're paying attention to this for our own liability for events. We're paying attention to employer liability. There is a movement afoot to kind of have indemnity clauses and release of liability for industries and for employers. We're seeing some of that movement at the national level. There is no hard and fast of who's liable for what right now, except if you're acting against any of the acts that have come out in the last 4 weeks. Mike, do you want to chime in with anything? Do you have an insight? Because please share.
Well, it's a really good question because there's not a good answer. As Shanna said, that there is starting to be some litigation, and these are all things that will be litigated. I think the key issue is that doing the best you can and specifically following the governmental advice that's available, showing that you're taking all the steps that are available to protect your employees and protect your customers, I think will be really important. In terms of the specific recommendations, I think you absolutely should talk with an attorney who's dealing with these things, because this is, our employment law lawyers are seeing a ton of this work. They're able to kind of give some general advice pretty quickly because they're seeing these questions and also able to focus on your particular needs. But it's a great question that will be, and I think it's from the newspaper, the types of issues that we're seeing will evolve, and they'll probably evolve in some fairly consistent way for all of us.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm paying attention to the most and feels the most risky, so there's a lot of gray area that will get litigated, and I think at the end of the day, if you can show that you've trained your staff, that you know the guidelines, that you're implementing all of the things and known pieces, that you have the hand sanitizer and the hand washing and the signage, and that you've done everything that you can, that's going to go a really long way. I think what is less clear is your ability and your inability, right, as an employer to require someone to come back who might be in a high-risk group and didn't tell you, and how do you ask them without breaking any kind of HIPAA laws or digging into somebody's medical history. That's an area that feels like it's going to have to get cleared up sooner rather than later. And I think the other area that I as an employer am nervous about and am paying attention to is, what am I required to have supplied my employees and or my attendees? That's when you come to breakfast, did I have to give you a mask? Did I have to turn you away if you didn't bring your own mask? Did my employees have to wear a mask? Did I provide them that mask? Am I not allowed to allow them to wear their own mask? Right? Those are the areas I think that I'm really paying attention to, particularly because at this point, disposable masks are not widespread and they are required kind of at large for anyone who doesn't have a complicating medical condition. Again, how do we determine that as a member of the public or as an employer? But they're required at large for anyone in Maine who is going into a closed environment that's open to the public. And so there's some onus on the person to arrive with a mask, but then we also have to provide masks, or do we, at our venues. And so we're working with all of our breakfast venues to determine, is it your thermometer that'll get used? Are you and your staff taking temperatures at the door? Is that now in our contract? Is there a fee with that? Those are the things that we're paying attention to. And, you know, your holiday parties are, you know, 6 months away. Are you going to have to figure that out for your holiday party? What does it look like? Can spouses not come anymore? Those are all things that I think we're going to navigate together, society as a whole, over the next couple of months. And a lot of that's going to be determined by law. We've been bringing you some really great webinars from the attorneys at Brandon Isaacson, and we have a commitment to continue to bring forward the best known information at the time. I think we're all getting whiplash about how quick that information is coming out and changing, but yeah, it's a really good question. Other questions?
If
Yeah,
I can,
please.
Shannon, if I can also add on that topic, talk with your insurance brokers as well, and the ways, you know, nobody or probably virtually nobody has quote unquote pandemic insurance, but understanding how the normal types of risks that businesses face will be affected by this is important. And so that, you know, does your employer's liability insurance cover this? Because if it kind of going back to litigation again, if it's that kind of a litigation claim, that's the first place to go to see whether your attorney's fees would be covered, whether any damages would be covered, for example. But that's insurance, and think about that in this new world.
No, that's right. And it's insurance, workers' comp insurance, and what new clauses that has. It is also insurance for different events or things that you might be doing. For those of you who are planning necessary business travel, travel insurance is something that you're going to pay attention to, and that's already shifting the way that they're working with it. There is on the topic of insurance.
Find out from our insurance broker that business interruption insurance did not cover the pandemic.
That's what I was going to say. So the SARS epidemic in 2012 did create pandemic insurance. So there was some clauses that were created as a result of that. They were expensive. You probably didn't have it unless you asked for it and you knew that you had it. And so there is some experience in the insurance industry in writing these. Every pandemic that I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but every pandemic we've ever faced as a global economy prior to this one has never had the wide and lasting impact that this one is and is going to have. And so even where there was pandemic insurance clauses before, there's some kind of rapid evolution within the insurance industry about what it looks like to underwrite, where pandemic insurance needs to come up, whether it's for your business interruptions, whether it's for specific events or specific purchases. And that's going to be another area where it's going to constantly emerge. I would say, you know, you've got 3 best friends over the next year, and it is your accountant, your insurance agent, and your attorney. And you should be in a really good constant communication with each of them to get the information you need, because there's going to be an ebb and flow of information in those areas. And I think that we're likely to see some things that come out and get reversed or changed, not just kind of updated, because this disease is less than 6 months old. The science on it is coming quicker than any science has ever come and is still shallow, right? And so those are things I think that are real for what you're facing. Are any of you in youth serving businesses? I did get some specific questions regarding youth, and so just want to check if that's an area that I should touch on. Let me just check the chat box. Okay. Other questions that you might have, happy to point out another item or two for you from the list that I shared. If you are able to access that email, one thing I would point out is there's a short survey. It closes today, so you guys be getting in under the wire. We're trying to get to 1,500 members. It would be the largest business survey informing DECD to date. We are working with other chambers to get your input. It's a pretty short survey, but we would be grateful if you clicked on it. That's at the very bottom of the email I shared. Couple of things that I would point out in the email was the human resources link about how to build a network of teams and how to continue to support what might be a larger than you would have expected remote workforce. If any of you are doing customer care in your environments, that customer care link I think is a really helpful one, ensuring that your team knows the basics on, are you inviting people from the public? If not yet, at what date do you expect that to change? Can they communicate that clearly? Do they know that? Do they have those lists of health questions that would allow someone to self-identify? And then how your team can be empowered to talk about what your business is doing, your approach, what guidelines you're using. We're defaulting to the CDC guidelines, which makes it really consistent for us and a solid reference point. But I thought that was a really helpful, and I think a lot of the good reading that's coming out right now is human resource related in terms of the physical environment and how office environments might shift. There's a lot coming from other industries, restaurant industry, retail, hospitality, travel. There's a lot of, what tech tools might get adopted at a higher rate now, what it looks like to remove middle seats in an airplane, for example. Office environments I haven't been seeing that level of kind of projected activity. And I think in part it's because folks expect that a large piece of what's going to be different about your physical office environment will be less people, because there is an underlying expectation that while there is a risk, if people can work remotely, they should and will choose to. I would say if you have a close office environment, putting up plastic plexiglass shields between workers who are sitting at desks really close together is something you could probably be expecting to be required or encouraged to do. Thinking again about your air conditioning system, thinking about staggering shifts. The break room as we know it and the waiting room as we know it are two things that won't look the same for quite some time. And what the physical design of your environment looks like, there is not strict guidance. There is no checklist. As soon as there is one, I'll be sharing it with you and the rest of our members. But those are some of the things that I'd be paying attention to, and the best kind of indicators of what you might need to be thinking of. There is some good information in that salon checklist. That's the one that maybe offers the highest level of detail. I gave you the OSHA guidance and would encourage you to read it. I will also say that it is guidance and it's not a requirement. That's a fine semantic definition, but it turns out it actually means a lot, because essentially at the end of the day, the OSHA guidance is just referring you back to the CDC, which is why predominantly the links that I've shared with you have been from the main CDC. Questions? I feel like I'm just chatting at you, and it's not my intent. I want to make sure I'm hearing specifically. I'd be interested in questions where you feel there's like a real lack of clarity, where I can try to get you some of those answers. Likely, if it's a question for you, someone else is quietly holding it as well. Yeah, Keisha's asking about childcare. Yeah, you're welcome to read that yourself. And to summarize, there is a direct link between what a workforce looks like and what a childcare support looks like. And so the commissioner, I think two things that I've gleaned from the commissioner in the conversations that aren't on record yet, and this is one of those areas, for those of you who joined early, you know I was referencing, the schools probably won't reopen. They won't reopen until next fall. you can expect some staggering or some shift in school schedules will be likely. So even if kids go back to school and it's full on normal, if you will, it won't be normal, but if all of the kids go back full time in the fall, there's a really high likelihood that they might be restricted at some point over the winter when there's, you know, some expectation that the virus might come back more rapidly in the winter. Some school districts are actually looking at a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and a Tuesday, Thursday schedule, or allowing different grades to be on site physically so that there's some social emotional development and connection, but that it's less crowded. Classrooms with eight kids in them and they're all sitting 6 feet away. And so that's, even if kids go back to school, I don't think it's going to be childcare, right? And I think that's the difference, Keisha, that you're pointing at, and it's spot on. We're going to be looking at what that looks like, but I don't, I'm a parent, right? So isn't Mike. I'm a parent. I have 3 teenagers at home, a middle schooler and 2 high schoolers, and it is hard and challenging and draining to figure out how to make sure they're getting their schoolwork done and I'm getting my work done. And that's not even counting like the actual bandwidth of what it looks like to have 4 humans Zooming at the same time, right? Thank you, Rachel. And so any solution about what that looks like, I think the structure is going to get looser. And I think that that's going to reflect what we need to do as employers to support our employees. If our kids physically in school on Tuesdays, is that the day that I come to the office and the rest of the week I don't? And that's when I'm working remotely. Is that what guides how we choose to stagger our employees on site? I think there's a lot of ways that we are going to be at the hands of what our daycare and schooling environment looks like. I think one of the things, and this goes back to like my second gleaned lesson, testing is a really big deal. It's the game changer between what we can do and what we can't do. A lot of folks don't know this. I've been surprised to find how many folks didn't know this, but right now, and as of Monday in New Hampshire, but right now you can go into a CVS or a Walgreens in Connecticut and get a test. And you can get the results to that test within an hour, and it can get texted to you, or you can just wait around and get your test. And you can know if you're carrying it, if you're asymptomatic, if you have it. And right now we're still providing tests in 2 tiers to Mainers. Yes, a recording will be made available along with all the links. I'll send that back out to you and hopefully some new materials based on Lisa's request. You're welcome. So, you know, you can go into a Walgreens and get a test right now in other states. And right now, first priority in Maine is healthcare workers and folks who have been admitted to the hospital, not even folks who are at the ER, actually admitted. And then the second tier is folks who are 60 and older or have any of those illnesses, those co-occurring illnesses. So, I mean, there's a really big difference between knowing that your kids' teachers aren't sick and your kids might be carrying it, but they're carrying it with each other and they're not likely to have symptoms or to fall real ill, which is a huge generalization, to be really clear. There are certainly kids who have gotten sick from this, so please don't misunderstand me. But if we had testing in place, it would really change the way in which you could manage your staff's exposure, their family's exposure, which might make it easier for daycare workers to go back to work. And that, I think, is one of the hinging pieces that we're paying attention to. I don't know how many of you, your business is deeply connected to tourism, but the 14-day quarantine and the impact of that quarantine is really significant on our tourism and hospitality business across the strait. We in Lewiston, Auburn, it's not that we don't have businesses that rely on hospitality and are embedded in that industry, but we are much more stable than the Bar Harbors and Old Orchard beaches of Maine. And we're really fortunate for that. It's, I think, been one of the things that supported our economy and our businesses being resilient over the summer. But that's a big deal, and it could be undone by being able to prove that you're not carrying it or that you're not ill because you've had a test and you can opt out of quarantine. And I think there's an expectation that those pieces will be available over the summer. What's been really challenging is acquiring those materials from the reagents and the actual testing machinery to the swabs that allow you to have the test. So that's an area, if as a business owner, you should be paying attention to, because you might be requiring or asking for tests at some point as a means of keeping the rest of your staff safe. And it's already in the US, it's just not here in Maine yet. And that's something that we've been kind of buffered away from that reality. Those tests are being deployed to hotspots, of which are, 2 and 4 hours south of us. So hopefully we don't have to be a hotspot to get widespread testing, but that's something you should be paying attention to. And I did put the testing and tracing article in there because I think as business owners, it's one of the things that you should be kind of right there on the front of paying attention to what's happening. Other questions about the badging, the reopening request form, any of those pieces that you're trying to navigate, or other areas where you're looking for some specific clarity? And most of you are choosing to be muted at this moment, which is perfectly fine, but unnecessary if you'd like to ask a question. Okay. I'm not going to take up more of your time if it's not useful to both of us. Any parting words or other thoughts, anything else that you would like from your chamber that we can bring to you or support you with, because those are areas I'm paying acute attention to. Great. Lisa had a question about I put it in there. So there's an email that I sent out, check your spam. You're welcome, Mike. There's an email I sent out that said our 1 o'clock path to opening office discussion. Everybody who registered, and I tried to get this out at 5:30 last night, so if you registered today, you might not have gotten this email, but I'm gonna send this out to everyone who registered, and then hopefully by late tomorrow or early Friday, I will send a list of the questions and responses that we got from DECD, pending their quick response. I'm hopeful. I have every reason to be hopeful. But I'll send that out in a second round of follow-up with some of these links. And Lisa, I'll work at finding some of those materials that you can print and post in your office and in your locations, because that makes a lot of sense that that's a need. I haven't seen it really specifically. So yeah, we'll work on that and getting that out to you. But the links that I've been referencing and the ones that I was sharing on my screen with you were in that email that I sent out in advance. And if you don't have that email, and you let me know in the chat box, I'll forward it to you right after this call so that you don't have to wait for all those goodies. And I hope to see you virtually or in person at a breakfast or after hours soon. We're doing some exciting things to innovate how we connect people and make sure folks feel included as we navigate this new time. So, and we welcome your ideas. If there's something fun you've done with your fishing buddies or your girlfriends recently, then let us know. We're trying out a bunch of fun stuff, but thanks everyone. Have a great day. I'll stick around for a minute in case you have any questions.